There is a place on this earth so large that if you flew over it for 6 hours in a straight line, you would still be inside it. Not inside a country, not inside a region, inside a single forest. The Amazon covers 5.5 million square kilometers. It produces 20% of the oxygen in the atmosphere. It holds 10% of all species on Earth. It generates its own weather, not just responding to rain, but creating it, lifting water from the forest floor into the sky and releasing it again hundreds of kilometers away. Scientists call these aerial rivers. Some of them carry more water than the Amazon River itself. But none of that is the reason this place is extraordinary. The reason is this. Somewhere inside 5.5 million square kilometers of living forest, there are people who have never seen the outside world. Not because they are prisoners, not because they are lost, because they have seen enough of the world that approaches them from outside, and they have made a decision. They have decided to remain. The Brazilian government estimates that there are between 100 and 130 uncontacted or voluntarily isolated groups living inside the Amazon basin today. Every one of them is aware to some degree that the outside world exists. Some of them were contacted in the past and chose to withdraw. Some have never been approached at all. All of them are, by official Brazilian policy, protected from contact. The agency responsible for that protection is called FUNAI, the National Indian Foundation. Its rangers patrol the most remote territories of the Amazon in small boats and on foot, maintaining invisible boundaries that separate one world from another. They do not make contact. They do not attempt communication. Their job is to watch, to monitor, to ensure that the boundary holds, and in doing so, they maintain something that almost nowhere else on Earth still has, a world that the modern world has not yet reached. This is the story of the Amazon basin, not as a landscape, but as a living system. One that includes the forest, the river, the communities that have shaped it for thousands of years, and the people who have chosen, in the face of everything coming from outside, to remain invisible inside it. Before the Amazon can be understood as a place where people live, it has to be understood as something that barely resembles what the word forest usually means. Every year, 180 million tons of dust drift across the Atlantic Ocean from the Sahara Desert. The winds that carry it travel nearly 7,000 kilometers over open water. When it settles over the Amazon, it delivers the phosphorus the forest cannot produce for itself, the essential mineral that keeps the soil alive. Without the Sahara, large parts of the Amazon would slowly weaken and die. The world's driest desert feeds the world's largest rainforest. That connection, invisible, continental in scale, operating over millennia, is one of the most important relationships on this planet, and almost no one knows it exists. The water cycle works the same way. A single large tree in the Amazon releases more than 1,000 liters of water vapor into the air every day through a process called transpiration. Multiply that by 400 billion trees, and the forest creates atmospheric rivers, invisible corridors of moisture flowing through the sky at altitudes of several kilometers, carrying more water than the Amazon River itself, delivering rain to cities and farmlands thousands of kilometers away. The Amazon does not just receive weather, it manufactures it. The forest, is not a single ecosystem. It is a mosaic of distinct worlds shifting over short distances. Some regions flood for months at a time, the water rising more than 10 meters, turning the forest into something between a river and a sea. Fish swim between the trunks of submerged trees. Pink dolphins move through the flooded canopy. Fruit falls from the branches directly into water, where specialized fish have evolved to wait for it. Other regions sit on ancient white sand soils so nutrient-poor that the vegetation growing on them looks nothing like the dense green canopy nearby. Sparse, low, more savanna than jungle. Walk 2 kilometers in the wrong direction, and you cross from one world into another so different that the species do not overlap. Beneath the forest floor, there is another layer of the Amazon that took centuries to understand. Scattered across the basin, particularly along ancient river terraces, there are patches of dark, rich soil that are different from everything around them. Darker, more fertile, alive with microorganisms that the surrounding soils do not have. This soil was not made by nature. It was made by people. The pre-Columbian civilizations that lived in the Amazon basin for thousands of years before European contact developed a soil technology that modern agriculture has not been able to fully replicate. They mixed charcoal, food waste, ash, and organic material into the ground in a process that created what scientists now call terra preta, dark earth. Soil so fertile and self-renewing that it is still producing exceptional harvests today, 2,000 years after the people who made it disappeared. The Amazon is not a wilderness untouched by human hands. It is a landscape that human beings spent millennia building. The forest we see today is, in significant part, a garden planted by civilizations whose names we do not know. That history changes the meaning of what remains inside it, including the communities that are still there now. The Amazon basin is home to more than 300 indigenous groups. They speak dozens of language families, not dialects of the same root language, but entirely distinct linguistic systems, as different from each other as English is from Japanese. Some of these communities live in towns and cities along the major rivers connected to the Brazilian economy, sending their children to schools in Manaus or Belém, navigating the junction between their traditions and the outside world, with varying degrees of friction and negotiation. They are not isolated. They are not frozen in time. They are people living in the 21st century, in a place that the 21st century has reached. Others live deeper, along the smaller tributaries, in communities that the supply boats reach once a month, if the water levels allow, that have a generator and a satellite phone and a school with one teacher for all ages, and also a knowledge of the forest that no university has ever formally recorded. The ability to identify hundreds of plant species by leaf shape and smell alone. The capacity to read river conditions that would be invisible to any instrument the outside world has yet invented. An oral history that extends centuries into the past without a single written word. And then there are the communities that cannot be reached at all. FUNAI has been tracking the territories of uncontacted groups inside the Amazon since the 1980s. They maintain listening posts and aerial monitoring programs. They receive reports from contacted communities whose members have seen signs: a fire in a place no contacted group camps, an abandoned village of a design no known community uses, arrows left in a tree, in a pattern that means stay away. The rangers who work these territories are among the most experienced forest navigators in the world. They travel for weeks at a time through areas that have no trails, no clearings, no landmarks that appear on any map. They are looking for signs of life without being seen themselves. They document, they mark territories, they file reports that go to Brasilia and are read by policymakers who will never set foot in the forest. The reason for the policy of non-contact is not sentimentality. It is epidemiology. When Europeans first entered the Amazon basin in the 16th century, they brought diseases, smallpox, measles, influenza, against which the indigenous population had no immunity. The death toll was catastrophic. Some estimates suggest that between 70 and 90% of the pre-contact Amazon population died within a century of first contact. Entire civilizations, entire languages, entire ways of understanding the world extinguished within a generation. The uncontacted groups living in the Amazon today are the survivors of that process, or the descendants of survivors who withdrew so far into the forest that the disease did not reach them. Their immune systems have had no exposure to the ordinary illnesses of the outside world. A common cold, introduced to an uncontacted community, can kill. A single contact event, even a friendly one, even a well-intentioned one, can initiate a process that ends a people. This is why the FUNAI rangers do not make contact. This is why the boundary exists. And this is why, in the territories where uncontacted groups have been confirmed, the Brazilian government maintains a policy of protection that is, in global terms, almost unique. The legal and operational acknowledgement that some human communities have the right to remain unknown. There have been violations. There are always violations. Illegal gold miners and loggers enter protected territories and do not observe boundaries that the law requires them to observe. Missionaries have attempted contact in defiance of both policy and common sense. In 2018, an American evangelical named John Allen Chow was killed by arrows on North Sentinel Island in the Indian Ocean, a story that echoed Amazon contact dynamics precisely. The world debated his motives. FUNAI rangers understood immediately what had happened and what it meant. The boundary is not a metaphor. It is the difference between a community that exists and one that does not. The Amazon River is the largest river on Earth by volume of water. Not the longest. The Nile is longer, by a few hundred kilometers, depending on where you begin the measurement. But the Amazon carries more water than the next 7 largest rivers in the world combined. At its mouth, where it meets the Atlantic Ocean, it discharges so much fresh water that the ocean is diluted for 200 kilometers offshore. You can drink the ocean, in some places, near the mouth of the Amazon. The river has already arrived before the land has. The city of Manaus sits at the junction of 2 rivers that could not be more different from each other. The Rio Negro flows in from the north, dark, almost black, the color of strong tea, its acidity the result of decomposing organic matter from the forests of Venezuela and Colombia. The Solomos arrives from the west, pale brown, sediment-heavy, carrying the mineral load of the Andes in suspension. These 2 rivers meet at Manaus and refuse, for several kilometers, to mix. They flow side by side in the same channel, dark on one side, pale on the other. A visible boundary in the water, a line you can cross in a boat and watch the color change beneath you. The locals call it the meeting of the waters. Scientists call it a density and temperature differential. Both descriptions are accurate. Neither one fully captures what it looks like to see it. Manaus itself is one of the most improbable cities on Earth. 2 million people in the middle of a rainforest that extends for 1,000 kilometers in every direction. No road connects it to the rest of Brazil by land. Everything that arrives in Manaus, food, medicine, fuel, electronics, building materials, arrives by river or by air. The city exists because the rubber boom of the late 19th century made it briefly one of the wealthiest places in South America, wealthy enough to build an opera house in the jungle with Italian marble and French ironwork shipped 7,000 kilometers up the river. The rubber boom ended. The marble stayed. The Teatro Amazonas still stands in the center of Manaus, a building so elaborate and so unexpected that it stops visitors cold, not because it is beautiful, though it is, but because it is so completely out of place. A European opera house at the edge of the largest wilderness on Earth, built by people who believed, for a moment, that the Amazon could be made into something else. It could not. The forest is still there. The opera house is still there. They have learned to coexist. Further into the basin, the river changes character. The main channel splits into tributaries that split into smaller tributaries that split into channels so narrow that the trees on both banks form a canopy overhead, and the light that reaches the water is green and filtered and ancient feeling. Travel far enough down these channels and the sounds of any settlement disappear completely. What remains is the river and the forest and the noise the forest makes, which is not silence. It is the opposite of silence. It is a layered, continuous, impossibly complex sound of an ecosystem running at full capacity. In the wet season, the river rises. It rises by 10 meters in some places, the height of a 3-story building, and the forest on both banks disappears beneath the water. The trees do not die. They have evolved for this. The fish swim between their trunks, following the same paths through the submerged forest that they follow every year, feeding on the fruits that fall from branches directly into the water above what was, 6 months ago, dry ground. Pink river dolphins follow the fish into the flooded forest. They navigate between the trunks with their eyes essentially closed, using echolocation in water so dark with tannins that vision is useless. They have been doing this for millions of years. The river is their Amazon, as much as it is anyone else's. When the water recedes, it leaves behind the enriched sediment that makes the Amazon's floodplains some of the most fertile ground on Earth. The communities that have always lived along the river understand this cycle in a way that cannot be learned from a textbook. They plant when the water retreats. They move when it rises. They build their houses on stilts or on floating platforms. They have organized their entire existence around the river's rhythm, because the river's rhythm does not organize itself around anyone. The Amazon River is not a feature of the landscape. It is the landscape. Everything else, the forest, the communities, the cities, the boundaries between worlds, is organized around it. From the air, the edge of the Amazon looks like a wound. The forest ends in a straight line, not the meandering boundary that a natural system creates following terrain and water and soil composition. A straight line, or a geometric curve, the kind that only a machine makes. On one side, forest, green and dense and alive, rising 40 meters. On the other, bare earth, red-brown, flat, already beginning the process of becoming cattle pasture or soy field or the outskirts of a town that did not exist 5 years ago. The Amazon is losing approximately 10,000 square kilometers of forest every year. That number has been higher, it has been lower, it fluctuates with political administrations and enforcement budgets and commodity prices on the other side of the world. When soy is expensive in China, pressure on the Amazon increases. When a Brazilian government relaxes environmental enforcement, the line moves faster. The forest does not negotiate, it simply retreats. But this is not simply an environmental story. It is a human one. The communities that live inside the territories being cleared are not abstractions. They are people whose access to food, water, medicine, and meaning depends on the specific forest they have lived in for generations. When the forest goes, the plants that their medical knowledge is built on go with it. The rivers that their navigation is mapped on change. The animals that their food systems depend on disappear. What replaces the forest is not a world they were prepared for, and is not, in most cases, a world that has a place for them. The uncontacted groups are particularly vulnerable. Their territories are protected by law, but a law that cannot be enforced across 5.5 million square kilometers of forest is, in practice, a line on a map. The illegal miners who enter protected territories do not stop at lines on maps. The loggers who begin at the boundary and work inward do not consult FUNAI before starting their chainsaws. In 2019, aerial photographs taken by FUNAI showed members of an uncontacted group in a territory that had been declared cleared for development by local authorities who had either not known or not cared about the protection status. The photographs showed people standing in a clearing, looking up at the aircraft passing overhead. Their body language, as interpreted by anthropologists who study such images carefully, suggested they had heard the sound of aircraft before. They were not afraid, they were watchful. That image, people standing in a forest, looking up at a world they have chosen not to join, is the Amazon in miniature. It is the question the forest poses to everyone who looks at it from the outside. What does it mean to choose to remain? What do they know about the forest and about what lies beyond it that makes that choice make sense? The FUNAI ranger, who has spent 20 years in those territories, cannot answer that question. He can tell you what the footprints look like. He can tell you the size of a village from the pattern of its clearings. He can tell you which direction a group moved in from the angle of the broken branches. He cannot tell you what they think about the aircraft that passes over them once a year, or what stories they tell each other about the world that exists on the other side of the trees. That knowledge belongs to them, and they have not offered it. There is a kind of knowledge that the Amazon holds that cannot be extracted. Not the genetic material of its undiscovered species, though that is real and irreplaceable. Not the pharmaceutical compounds in its plants, though researchers have identified hundreds of molecules with potential medical applications that exist nowhere else. Not even the carbon locked in its biomass. though that carbon, if released, would accelerate climate change in ways that would be felt by every person on Earth. The knowledge that cannot be extracted is the knowledge of how to live inside it. The 300 indigenous groups who remain in the Amazon basin carry between them a map of this forest that no satellite has produced and no algorithm has replicated. They know which plants treat which conditions. They know which rivers flood when. They know which trees the animals use and why and in what season. They know the Amazon not as a system to be studied, but as a place to be lived in, which is a form of knowing that takes generations to accumulate and can be lost in a single generation if the conditions that made it possible are removed. The uncontacted groups carry the furthest reach of that knowledge, the part that has had the longest uninterrupted time to develop, undisturbed by the outside world. Whatever they know about the deep forest, about the plants no contacted community has catalogued, about the ways of moving through territory that leave no trace, that knowledge exists nowhere else. We will never know what it is. That is not a failure. That may be the point. The Amazon is the largest remaining wilderness on Earth, and inside it, right now, people are living in ways that the modern world does not have words for, because the modern world did not develop those words, and the people who did develop them have not shared them with us. That is not a tragedy. It is a boundary. And boundaries, when they are maintained with respect, tell us something important. That not every place belongs to us, and not every form of knowledge was made to be extracted and distributed and turned into content. Some things exist intact only because they have not been touched, and the decision to leave them intact is, in a world that has touched almost everything, a choice that takes more discipline than most of us understand. We want to hear from you. If you could spend 1 month living in a contacted Amazon community, no phone, no outside connection, learning from people whose knowledge of this forest is thousands of years deeper than anything in any textbook, would you go? What would you be willing to give up to know what they know? Tell us in the comments. We read every single one. If this film changed how you think about wilderness, about what we protect and what we lose when we stop protecting it, share it with someone who needs that question. And if you want to explore more hidden corners of our planet through documentaries like this, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. It helps us keep telling these stories. Next week, we are going somewhere that burns. Not with fire, with a heat that comes from deep underground and has been coming for 60 years and shows no sign of stopping. A town the government tried to erase from every map that exists. A town where 5 people looked at everything happening beneath their feet and said, "This is still home. We will be there. We will see you there."